Welcome to this LinkedIn Live with my very lovely guest, Leang Chung. And I want to just call this out first of all, we went live this exact same time on Tuesday, and we had a really wonderful 15-minute conversation, and I'm not sure where that conversation ended up, but it did not go to LinkedIn. And so we're doing another version again to talk about the podcast that came out on Friday last week, which has already got 200 listens at this stage, so really popular topic. And really, really great conversation with Leang, and I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to share insights and to talk about some of the struggles that women have, and women of colour in particular have in the workplace, and the kind of steps that we can put in place to mitigate some of the issues that exist. So Leang, would you like to introduce yourself, and maybe tell us what you did for St. Patrick's Day yesterday, sorry, not last year.
So hi, everybody. I'm Leang Chung. I'm the founder and CEO of Pelora, which is a company that I actually started in the middle of COVID. So I'm one of the, the new entrepreneurs, right, that emerged during the wake of the pandemic. And what we do at Pelora is we help early stage founders, people teams, and mid-career women and non-binary people prepare for that next stage of growth for them. So that's what I do. I'm super excited to promote this podcast episode. Super excited to reconnect with you, Aoife, on this really wonderful conversation. In terms of what I did yesterday, I don't really go out or celebrate for St. Patrick's Day generally. So it was just a typical day for me in the home office here.
Brilliant. Yeah, it was glorious weather here in Ireland, but we're still in lockdown at the moment. So, there's certainly people had some celebrations, but I think they're much more on a personal level this year compared to a few years ago when it would have been a bit more upbeat, let's say. But glorious weather, and it's kind of filtered into today as well. So really, really nice weather again. So maybe we just dive right in and talk about what are some of the key areas that we spoke about on the podcast.
Yeah, so one of the big areas is we went pretty spoke at length about the power of networking and how that really is instrumental in advancing women in the workplace, and the relationship that we have with that term networking. There's something that's very transactional about it. It feels like this really dirty or icky, feeling when we, a lot of women think about that, especially a lot of the clients that I work with. But we know that it's important. We know that we need to do it. We know that we need to find a way to embrace it. But how exactly do we do that? And one of the methodologies or approach that I use myself, because I too was in that camp of, not really enjoying that process, right? And then now I'm coaching clients, right? In order to help them, right, transition through that process and start to embrace it. And one of the ways in which we do that is by redefining what networking means. And the way that I've converted it to make it my, to really own it and accept it as a enjoyable process is defining it as, it's relationship building with and spending time with people that I can learn from and people that I enjoy spending time with. And once that I was able to make that shift for myself, I noticed that there was a remarkable difference in terms of like how quickly I gravitated towards that process and how enriching it has been on my own career. My own experience, and I wanted to be able to share that knowledge with other women. Our relationship being a perfect examul of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of my previous events that I did with Landing Point, and we're really curious about the topic that I was talking about, and then we ended up having a conversation, and then you invited me onto this onto your podcast, and so it's just been I think it's a great illustration of all of the wonderful things that can come out of these new relationships, right? That we're cultivating and exploring, pursuing every day, and the impact that's having on our career.
Definitely. And I know one of the topics that we covered in relation to networking, I did speak about this book, and I kind of brought it up a couple of times on the podcast, called How Women Rise by Sally Helgeson and Marshall Goldsmith. And it's a really insightful book. Certainly for me, there were a lot of aha moments. It's all about the habits that women have that get in our way when it comes to our careers. And so you reach a certain point, or you reach a certain level in your career, and where those behaviors and those habits really stand to us up until that point. But to go beyond that point, then there's actually things that might hinder us. And one of those is exactly this idea of networking and the perception, because typically women are very good at building relationships, but it's when it comes to leveraging those relationships, I think that's where women tend to struggle a lot. And asking for what we want, being really clear about what we want and what we can bring to that relationship as well. So I did actually write a LinkedIn article about that book, kind of doing a review or a summary. And if anyone hasn't read that yet, feel free to go to my profile. You'll see it in my previous articles, and I'll tag you as well, Leang, in that. So that you can see what I've posted and what I've said about. There's 12 different habits. It's super interesting. And like I said, for me, there were certainly some aha moments where I'm like, oh yeah, I've definitely done that in the past. And just raising our awareness of these habits that we have, I think it's really, really important. But networking was one of those key ones that is highlighted in that book as well.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And that was, another aspect of that conversation that I thought was, a really important thing for you to raise and bring up, because it is a struggle, right? For some women to, how do you take that initial conversation, that initial contact, and then sustain that relationship? Like, how do you build a rapport with them, and how do you keep that that conversation alive? And especially in the virtual world, right, where we're not interacting with each other, or have the opportunity to accidentally, run into each other, right, in real life. And one of the things that we chatted about is coming from a place of figuring out ways in which you can add value to the person, right? How can you give, whether it's offering them, maybe a book suggestion, or there's some, there was an article that was released that talked about something that the two of you were, engaged in a conversation with, right? That they may find valuable, or seeing a job posting, right? That could be interesting for them. Doing those things helps to, reignite those relationships that, have that started months ago, right? Or, weeks ago, and it keeps that fire burning. And it also helps to provide you with an excuse, right, to get reconnected with that person.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some other aspects as well that we spoke about. Do you want to touch on some of those different elements?
Yeah. So the other thing that we talked about as well, which is a passion area of mine, is the idea, the concept of project managing your career. A lot of people, when we are working on, let's say it's a rollout of a new software, we create a really robust project plan, right, to make sure that happens. And that project plan is going to be super detailed about all the different actions that need to take place in order to reach that end goal, right, that go live date. And it's going to include milestones. It's going to include, other people who are involved in the project, and deadlines. And those little steps and those little milestones really help to ensure that we're staying on track, that we're being super focused, and that we're going to achieve the goal at the end of the day. However, when we approach our career, we don't approach it in the same way. It's like we throw out this goal, and I'm totally guilty of this, right, throughout different points in my career, where I say, I'm going to achieve this role, right, by this age, right, or this point in my career. And there's no plan to it, right? I've just kind of thrown it out there as a thing. And then you get utterly disappointed if it doesn't happen.
Mm.
And so the work that I do with from a coaching perspective with my clients is mapping that out. Having a real honest conversation in terms of like, what is it that you're hoping to achieve? What's your ultimate goal that you're trying to work towards, and let's start to map out what that plan looks like. Who's going to be involved in this process to help amplify you and give you visibility in the workplace. What kind of projects should you be seeking, right, in order to give you the visibility that you need? What are the different conversations, right, that you should be having, right, throughout that process? And then what are some of those milestones that you can build into that timeline and that process, so that you're celebrating things, right? You're celebrating the wins, right, along the way. And it shows that you're making progress and you're getting that much closer to your end career goal.
Yeah, it's funny, like, it's such a straightforward approach, but no one really teaches us how to manage our careers, not in the way that you're outlining just now. We kind of enter into it, and like you say, we have these maybe grand vision or a grand goal in mind, but we don't really have any idea of how to get there. And I feel oftentimes people are very reactive in their careers, that we kind of accept or reject whatever is presented to us as an option or as an opportunity. But the way you're describing is about being much more proactive in our careers and taking responsibility for ourselves and how we manage that.
Yeah, it's much more, I would say, it's much more intentional.
Intentional, I love that word. Yeah.
To fade, right, or what someone decides, is best for us. We're being super intentional about it, and also, very specific, right, in what we want to achieve for us, and sticking with it, right. And it's not to say that you're being really rigid about it, but I think it's having an element of focus, right, that helps you to to stay on track and and reach those goals, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Now there was one or two at least other areas to look at. Do you want to dive into those in a little bit more detail, and then we can wrap things up?
Yeah. So the other where we closed off the conversation was a focus, a much more narrow focus on how the workplace can help, with advancing women, and more specifically women of color in the workplace. And we started to talk about, different, systems that are in place, and things that I believe that you had asked me, what are some of the things that companies can do in order to help? And my response to that is, it's looking at the little decisions, right, that are not PRable. These aren't the things that you're blasting out in social media, that you're creating a billboard, right, to promote. It's not the thing that you're, bragging about, right, at the next, big conference. But they have a significant impact, right, on the presence, right, of women of color, and really, amplifying them, and really helping to advance them and creating true equality in the workplace. And that's looking at the way in which you operate, right? The decisions that you're making every day. So, a perfect example of that is who's involved in your hiring process, right? Who are you selecting to be part of your interview panel? Why were they selected? And what kind of weight does that person's opinion or perspective weigh on the overall decision process in terms of who gets hired and who doesn't get hired? And the same goes for the people who are involved in decision making as it pertains to who gets the sexiest project, right? That, with the high profile client, right? That's going to really make or break someone's career, or who gets selected for the next promotion, whose voice is in the room, right? In order to make that decision, right? As to who gets identified for those things. And I think that's where the real work happens, because it's in those little, the everyday decisions, right, that aren't, PRable, that make a huge difference. And the last thing I want to leave listeners with is that this is not something that we're going to fix overnight. It's not, one unconscious bias training, right? And then, we wipe our hands clean and everything's solved and the world.
That box is ticked and let's move on. Yeah.
It is a lot of small steps and very, very intentional work that has to be practice across and executed across the entire organization in order to really see progress and see real change.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I love this concept of it being a journey as well. So it's not, you're not going to reach a destination all of a sudden. It's a constant journey and it takes consistent work over time. It's not just exactly as you say, you're going to do a training and then suddenly everything is fixed in the organization. And I love this idea of being intentional. And I love the idea that it's around behaviors and how decisions are made at work, because that's really the bedrock of the culture of the organization that you work in. And it's really important to make sure that it's how decisions are being made is in a fair way. Yeah,
I agree. So for the companies out there who are looking to make real change, that's where it's at. It's in all of that. That's where the real work happens.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to share? Anything else that you want to leave listeners with today about the podcast or anything else?
I think, it's such an important topic. And I, just really hope that listeners can gain something from it, right? Whether you you identify as being part of this demographic or not. If you're part of this demographic, I hope that you gain something, a tip or advice for yourself that you can apply immediately. And for the listeners who don't fall into that demographic, it's about, how can you help amplify women and help them advance in the workplace? What's your role in that project plan, right? To help them achieve their career goals.
This is it. Yeah. Brilliant. So for anyone who hasn't listened to the podcast yet, you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, but there's also a link below to listen to the full episode on my website. So you'll find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I'd like to take some time to thank you again, Leang, for your time on the podcast and for your 2 times coming on to LinkedIn Live with me. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you about this.
You're welcome. All right. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.